Hey everybody, Fett here at Azalea Studios in Nashville. I have the honor of talking to Barry French here, who is a taxi member for just shy of 5 years now, and as I have often said to people, has more experience with taxi in 5 years than some people get in 15. And Barry is a very active member, has had a lot of success, a lot of forwards with taxi, and learned an awful lot from the process. So that's why he's here today. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Fett. Glad to be here.
Good to have you with us. Now, you are a composer, a guitarist, and a songwriter.
Correct.
And you've been active with taxi pretty much since the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You came up with a system all your own and have really stuck with it and been very consistent about your participation, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I'd like to ask you about is the taxi forums. I know you told me a couple of years ago it's one of the best kept secrets about taxi. It's one of the best tools available for people, and it doesn't cost anything extra. So let's go ahead and talk about that. How did you first find out about the forums yourself?
Back when I first joined Taxi, I was just going through everything on their website, and they had a little section that talked about the forums. So I thought, well, what's the forums? What is this about? So I went on there and just kind of surfed around. Actually was lurking on the forums for at least maybe about 5 or 6 months before I even joined Taxi.
So you invented the term forum stalker, huh?
No,
you were
not
lurking
me.
on the forums. I like that. That's great.
I won't take credit for inventing that term, but yeah. So I just kind of lurked around just to get a feeling for what Taxi was. I had been looking at joining Taxi for about a year before I finally pulled the trigger on it in January of '08.
Oh, so you're able to get on the taxi forums without even being a taxi member?
Yep.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
So they're really open to the whole public?
Open to the entire world.
Taxi. Great.
For better or worse.
Yeah, that's good for people to know. That's excellent. So you lurked around for a while, then what happened?
Joined Taxi, and right after I joined, I signed up on the forums as a member.
Right.
And just kind of spent some time going through the different sections, getting a feel for what each section was about, introducing myself to the other members, and kind of getting a feeling for what the community was like. Right. Which I recommend doing that. Any forum that you're going to join, whether it's Taxi or not, you get a feel for the community, get a feel for how people interact with each other. Specifically, if you're a musician, because we can be emotional people at times.
Yeah.
And when you're reading stuff on the internet, you can't read tone of voice, you can't read inflection, so you don't really. You might not judge something the proper way that it was intended to be. So I just spent some time. I'm getting to know some of the people just through the posts on the forums and the general hangout section, and then a couple other places too.
So I've got a couple of questions for you. When you were during your lurk phase before you actually signed up for Taxi, do you remember what you learned from the forums during that period? Like what you discovered by being on the forums that you didn't know about Taxi or about the process before that?
I would say one was there were a lot of people out there that were like me. That had tried to do the artist thing for a while, got discouraged with that, and then wanted to figure out, okay, what can I still do with music at this point in my life? I still have a day job, and I found a lot of people on the forums that still had day jobs, and that were also having some success with music through Taxi. So just found a lot of people that I could relate to.
So you're saying people who had day jobs and were having success through Taxi at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, great. So when you did get on and you introduced yourself, did you notice anything about the, let's call it the protocol or the vibe of the forums that was really useful for you as far as kind of how people conducted themselves and what the overall tone of it was? Yeah,
I think for the most part, everybody on there is very generous. There's a generosity spirit, a community spirit. People would be very gracious with their time and their knowledge. If you posted, hey, I'm new to Taxi, I'm new to this whole music biz thing. This is, what I'm working on. This is where I want to go. And just try to get some feedback. One thing that I noticed was, if you were trying to get very general feedback, you're not going to get as much response because a lot of people on there don't have a lot of time.
Right.
Because some of them have day jobs, and everybody's trying to push, further their own career. But if you ask very specific questions, you tended to get more responses, and it was more helpful.
Right. So one of the things I've definitely noticed on the forums is how active the very successful members are and how generous they are with their time. Did you find as a newbie when you got on that that the types of questions that you were asking, you were getting from people who were really experienced about it, or was it just a whole bunch of people jumping in and kind of screaming about it?
There were some. There's just a lot of people jumping, but there were also several experienced guys like John Mazzei, Dave Walton, Dean Crepane, Matt Hertz. You know, the guys that.
It's like a who's who of names from Taxi right there.
Yeah. We were on the 5-year plan panel back at the rally a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Those guys so generous with their time, and they always tried to help people. Chuck Schlochter, you know, another local Nashville guy, was always very generous with his time, and it was really encouraging to see that no matter what level of success that those other guys had already achieved, that they were still willing to help out the little guys.
Gotcha.
There was no class distinction, you know, between the seasoned vets and the rookies. Everybody was there to try to help everybody else along.
And that is not typical of a lot of music organizations.
Or any organization,
honestly,
but specifically music.
That's great. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. So when you got on the forums and you started asking questions, what were the types of topics or questions or subject matter that you asked about and got feedback? In other words, for somebody who hasn't been on the forums before, what would you recommend to them, or the types of things they can ask people to get this really legitimate feedback for?
Okay. Well, there are a few different sections, and depending on what you're looking to get out or to get out of, you know, the forums, it'll depend where you want to go. If you're new to taxi in general, the peer-to-peer section is the place where you can go. You can post up. Let's say you're working on a listing that's due, and you're not really 100% sure that what you have that you're wanting to submit is a perfect fit for that listing.
Okay.
So you can go to the peer-to-peer section. You post up. You create a new topic. Put the title of what the listing is going to be about. Maybe it's indie rock songs. Okay. So you put in the thread, you know, here's the listing itself, so people can have the reference, because with Taxi, it's all about the listing.
Yeah.
You could have the perfect country song, but if you submit it to an indie rock listing, you're going to get a return.
Yeah.
So it's all about the listing. So you put in the listing, then you put a link to your track, so that people can go and hear it, and then they can listen to that track in the context of the listing you want to submit it to. And then at that point, you can ask, you know, as specific questions as you want. You can say, you know what, I'm 100% happy with the lyrics at this point. The only feedback I'm really wanting to hear would be about the mix. Does the mix sound right? Gotcha. Or you might be just the opposite. You know, like, the mix sounds fine, but I'm not sure these lyrics really work. Could you guys give me some perspective on lyrics? Right. So you can do that, and then you can get feedback from the various members that, you know, will chime in and say, yeah, this is working for me, this isn't working for me. And, you know, what I would do is recommend you look at all of the responses you get and try to get maybe an average. You know, don't just go with just one and say this is the end all be all response, or you know, just because you're going to have a variety of people chiming in.
As you would in any music critique situation. Right. So really what you're talking about is a sort of a pre-screening process before you ever get screened by Taxi at all. And it's people who have a common interest in everybody succeeding, it sounds like to me. It doesn't sound very competitive that you would get that kind of feedback.
Surprisingly, it's really not. Yeah. It's not. You would think it'd be a lot more competitive, but it really isn't.
That's fantastic.
It's almost unbelievable, honestly. Yeah. You know.
So if you went to the other side of the process, let's say you did submit to a listing and you got a return, and there was some feedback on the return that said why it wasn't appropriate for the listing or whatever the case may be. Is there any way through the forums to find out how first of all, what did get forwarded, and secondly, how does your song stack up against that forward? Is there a place to go on the forums to find that kind of information?
Yeah, there's a section called Forwards.
Oh, there you go.
There's two sections, one success stories and another one called Forwards, where people will post, you know, success stories and forwards. So in the forward section, if you know, there's times where a lot of people get forwarded for the same listing. They'll go and they'll post on there, hey, I got forwarded for this sports rock instrumental listing. And then they'll post a listing up, and then they'll put the tracks that got forwarded. Some people also put the tracks that got returned, you know, because you don't always, you know, you might submit 3 tracks, 2 might get forwarded, 1 might be returned. So, you know, you can do that, and then you can go and listen to them, and you can see, all right, this is what got submitted, and this is what got forwarded. Now, Michael has said that I think maybe I'm going to be wrong on this person. Michael Lasco, president of CEO Taxi. Yeah. He said that there's a very small percentage of taxi members actually are active on the forums. Now, I don't know what the actual number is, but it's a much smaller number than the members. I know that I want to say over 10,000 active taxi members. Not nearly that many active on the forums. I'd say it's probably in the hundreds to 1,000.
Well, that's really interesting, because based on what we were just talking about, the fact that it's a very supportive community, it's not competitive, and there's really successful people on there to provide feedback. It's like this gold mine that's sitting there that's really for the serious people.
Yeah.
That's the way it sounds to me.
It really is.
So if you want to get serious with taxi, one of the first things you really need to do is get on those forums, right?
Highly recommend it.
That's fabulous. So here's one of the very, very common things that you hear when somebody gets a return from a listing is not appropriate for the listing, or not appropriate for the genre. So one of the big questions that comes up all the time is, I'm somebody who writes songs or composes pieces of music, and somebody talks about a particular style of music with some terminology, whether it's indie rock or it's what's the one Chuck Schlachter uses, redneck dramedy.
Oh, Southern dramedy.
Southern dramedy, whatever the case may be. How do people find out, through the forums or otherwise, what those genres really mean? Because it's a very, very common thing where people either just don't know what the term is in the first place, or they submit something they think is absolutely spot on for that genre, and they're told doesn't fit the genre. So any advice there?
Yeah, that's a challenging answer. I'm sorry, it's a challenging question.
Probably challenging
and
answer
challenging
too,
answer too, actually. Yeah. Because there is, even though for a lot of the broad genres, you know, there's some absolutes to those.
Right.
But when you get into some of these more niche genres, it's sometimes hard to know what they actually are, because it varies depending on who you talk to, because not everybody thinks the same way.
You're talking about on the receiving end, the people who actually use the music.
Right.
Gotcha.
Because music supervisors and you know, the people that are getting some of these listings, they don't necessarily know what they're actually asking for. And I know Michael, you know, there's times where they really spend a lot of time really trying to just pull as much information out of those listing parties as they can, to give us as taxi members as much information as we can get to submit to them. So one place you could go is a place called Spotify. It's a music service that you can go and you can listen. You can do searches for different.
And it's free.
It's free.
Yeah.
The forums, you know, you can, the same peer-to-peer section I mentioned earlier. You can go there and say, hey, you know, this is a track I have. I'm not sure what genre this is. What do you guys think it is?
Have other people tell you.
Have other people, because I know for me personally, I have a much harder time describing what my music sounds like than I do describing what other people's music sounds like. Because even though I've been able to detach myself emotionally from the music I create, I'm still having, it's just not always easy for me to say, okay, what genre is this?